Hello, everybody, and welcome to Into the Abyss. It is Halloween, All Hallows Eve, Samhain, Day of the Dead. Happy Halloween, everybody. I'm your host, Leslie Martin, and we've got my co-host, Grav. How you doing today, Grav?
Doing pretty good, adding to the whole Halloween aesthetic by turning off the lights here.
Yeah, see, I can't do that because I'm black, and then all you would see is my teeth and my earrings, and that would be bad.
Oh, man.
So how's your week been?
My week has been pretty good. I had a drive through Trump country today, or not today, but a couple of days ago. I went to go visit a friend who was redeveloping a house. Like their family does, their family did landscaping for a long time, and then they recently started doing like redeveloping one of these properties or whatever. So I went to go see them, and I got to take some like back roads because I wanted to dodge some tolls. Cutting through North Carolina, just a ton of like Trump Pence signs just all along the way, and it's funny because once you reach like a certain part of North Carolina, like the demographics change heavily. So like you'll get into like the towns. I think it was like Lylesville and like I think Anton County, I think it is, and just in general. Like it's like so like the demographics are so wild that like the inner towns is just Biden Harris everywhere. But the minute you reach like a hint of woods, just Trump Pence signs all down. So I was driving through there and it was pretty interesting. I mean, it was kind of like a.
Did I lose you? Grav, you froze.
Am I frozen?
No, you're back.
Okay, cool. My bad. Yeah, no, I was just saying that like I was 10 minutes away from civilization, so it wasn't that bad. I wasn't in like a food desert of sorts, but I still felt like I was out in the middle of nowhere, where it's just peace and quiet. It was kind of nice.
That sounds nice. Did you see any people dressed? Oh, you said it was yesterday though, not today.
It was a couple days ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So did you guys do anything for Halloween?
Nah, we were thinking about inviting friends over, but then we realized that one of the friends that we were going to invite is a no masker type of person.
Ooh.
So we were like, we don't want to endanger people. So let's not.
No, that makes sense. Well, today is Halloween, and with our Halloween special, we have a special guest live from Australia. We have John Safran.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, John?
Good. Tell me if my sound's annoying or anything at any point, because I haven't quite figured it out yet.
No, you sound great.
Cool. Oh my God, look at my hair.
Yeah, that's what are we going for today?
Because I'm a boy, I don't really look at myself except if like a selfie's taken or I'm on a video podcast, and it's like, oh, that's the first I've looked at myself for 2 weeks. Yeah, it's a bit too much frizz, I guess, really. So, but we're I don't know what it's like where you are, but we've been in isolation in Melbourne it just opened up about half a week ago, where like there were, we weren't allowed to leave the house from 8 p.m. till 5 in the morning, and we're only allowed out for 1 hour per day for exercise, and because of the pandemic. Yeah, so we all became, that's why I look like a rabbinical hobo a bit. Because like
I'm digging the COVID look. I really am. It's very Yahoo Serious-esque.
Yeah, interesting. Do you know Grav? Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Do you know Yahoo Serious, or is that like a generational thing that only us Gen Xers know, and he's been lost at some point?
That's a Gen X thing.
Yeah. So, he was mentioned he was one of these like flavors of the month things that sort of just came and went, like a fidget spinner kind of thing. Yeah, and he was, you know, Crocodile Dundee, don't you?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so he was sort of a bit after that, kind of not in a. I'm not insulting Yahoo Serious or anything, but it was a bit of in the the rolling poor man's version to that, if you know what I mean, or whatever the non-judgmental version of saying poor man's version is.
Yeah.
And because it was one of those things. After Crocodile Dundee became huge, it became, oh yeah, let's find the next one and the next, and all this Australian stuff. And he was sort of like he was like part of that. And he did a film, what was it called, Young Einstein, where it was, it was he had my hair basically, and it was like the story of young Einstein, the fictitious story where he's like he grew up in Aussie larrikin, and I don't know how they somehow linked it back to the real Einstein.
So like Crocodile Dundee, he's the actor Paul Hogan, right?
Yeah.
That guy died in a police shootout.
No, what the hell? That's not true. That's
the
hilarious.
real Crocodile Dundee dies in police shootout Thursday.
Oh,
August
the real
5th,
one. I thought you meant Paul
1999.
Hogan. Oh, I didn't know that.
Wow.
Yeah, you definitely want to do a bit of due diligence, because it might be one of those things where it's like, I'm the real Kramer, and there was like about 17 people who claimed they were the real Kramer. But I mean, obviously, it's sad he got killed, so that's no good.
So do you get
I
anybody?
confused him with the other guy, the one that got stung by what is it? He got pierced by a stingray.
Steve Irwin.
There we go. I got him confused with Steve Irwin. I remember the year that Steve Irwin died.
Can I tell you something about Steve Irwin? And it kind of, maybe it's got the lesson of how the media can reframe history and events just so amazingly, or something like that. So it's not just a shallow story of him. But do you know Steve Irwin was Michael Jackson level huge in America, and people in Australia hadn't heard of him.
Really?
Yeah, because he wasn't like Paul Hogan was huge in Australia for decades, and then he broke out in America, whilst Steve Irwin became huge on cable television, and Australia didn't really have a culture of cable television back then. So, and I went to America, I reckon it was like early 2000s maybe, and people were talking to me about saying catchphrases, and I just couldn't follow what anyone was going on about. And then something came up. I heard Steve Irwin a few times, and then I realized later I realized he was like Michael Jackson big in America, and he wasn't famous. He wasn't famous in Australia yet. And I've got proof this is true, because I chased it up, because I half remembered this thing. And there was an Australian 60 Minutes episode where they covered him, and that was their starting point, with the journalist going, he's the biggest thing in America and no one's heard of him in Australia. And then subsequently he became big in Australia because he was big in America. And then that's all been whitewashed, that little glitch in the history.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
I didn't even think about it like that.
Well, I've talked about this on other episodes and other shows about like a lot of comedians that you see and they're like breakout star. And it's like, no, they've been grinding for 25 years. You've just never heard of them, which is kind of the same thing, at least a little bit with you, John, because I know you're known in Australia. I don't know how many people in the States know who you are.
Why would they? Yeah, it's probably good. It's a problem that people know me in Australia, because then not everyone who knows you is like happy with you. So I'm happy not to be known in America. I'm gonna let's keep it that way.
Well, I mean, you're from the like prankster era of like reality television. Yeah.
So I was just like working a normal job, and then our version of the BBC, called the ABC here, put out a call, and this was before. I mean, maybe the internet was technically. I think the internet was technically there, but it wasn't this cultural force like it is now. And they just put out a call and said they wanted 8 young filmmakers or 8 young people who had never been on TV before or been in the film industry before, and they're going to send us around the world and we'd all go around separately to separate countries, and we'd have to send back a little mini documentary once every 10 days or 14 days or something. And yeah, and I went on that, and I'd never particularly wanted to be on TV or done or wanted to do documentary. I'd never really thought about it before, but I'd wanted to do something creative ever since I was like in grade 3 or whatever. So I just tried out different things. Like grade 4, I tried to be a comic book writer. Grade 6, I tried to write comedy skits. And I was one of those sorts of kids, and then formed a band in high school and entered Battle of the Bands in university. I was just like one of those sorts of people, like struggling to sort of figure out where to...
Now, do any of those is there any record of any of those things that we could see anywhere?
Oh yeah, I think they're always like up and down on YouTube. Like I don't take them down or anything like that. I really should put in more effort to having some coherent online presence, I guess. But
so
go on.
I was just gonna say that I think I wanted to kind of like translate how like your style of show, along with the other sort of like prankster style shows as well of that era, influenced the internet, because like you said, it wasn't that cultural of a force. So what ended up happening was the internet media at the time of like the independent YouTube channels, right before it was all like really corporate as it is now, it kind of served as like a feedback loop where the internet media was like a year or two behind. So what you ended up seeing was like you would have like for example like the channel E, and like that whole like news reporting of like, oh, this is the celebrity gossip and all that other stuff. YouTube, like you had YouTube channels that started going into that style like a year or two after that. And so it's kind of the same thing where you had the prankster era of television shows, right? Because we had that era over here in the American television system. I forgot, what is it called over here? It's like the something pranksters or something like that.
Like crank anchors and all of those. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. The more recent Comedy Central ones, I can't remember what they're called, but they're like 3 guys from Brooklyn.
It's crank anchors, where they did the prank phone calls, and then they changed it.
That's the one with the puppets.
It changed to puppets, but it used to just It used to. Okay, before you were born, Grav.
Yeah, that was probably before I was born.
Before you were born, and I don't know if you remember this, John. The crank anchor guys used to be on Howard Stern all the time. Before they did the puppets, it was just the guys, and then they changed it to the puppets. But I don't know if you remember that show. Crank Anchors, it was guys that used to do prank calls on a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, we would have got, pirated copies of cassettes of that in Australia at that point. Yeah, but it is interesting. Like at that point in time, there was a bit of a upsurge of that particular genre. And the weird thing for me was I didn't know about all these other people doing it. And so I was just like in Australia, I sort of, when I found myself on that show where I kind of had to come up with material, I remembered, because at university I'd read a lot. I was just one of those real excitable people who read a lot. And I read a bit about this movement, I think in the 60s, called the Yippies, not the hippies, the Yippies. And there were people like Abby Hoffman and other people like that, and they do pranks, but there'd be like some subtext to it, like as opposed to it just being kind of candid camera or whatever. And so for some reason, I don't know why, because I was never particularly into that or whatever, but when the flames were to my feet and I was overseas and I had to like suddenly deliver like a documentary once every 10 days, somehow I remembered that. And so I started doing this thing where there was a lot of energy because you're in the real world, but you're sort of like introducing these sort of elements of like comedy storylines into it. Like the one where it really came together in my head was I was in the Ivory Coast in West Africa looking at voodooism, and I went around to different voodoo priests, and I had a copy of a love letter from my ex-girlfriend who I'd just broken up with before, and a photo of her. And I was like going around saying, oh, listen, I want to can you put a curse on my ex-girlfriend or whatever? And I just went around to different voodoo doctors. So you're sort of doing this thing that National Geographic would do, but then sort of like superimposed over it was this like weird, like self-aware, self-absorbed storyline kind of driving it. And yeah, that seemed to work. I was like, oh, I should just do this, really. And basically everything I've done since has been like some version of that.
So was that okay? So the first time I saw you, and to explain to everybody how I came to know who you are, back in the MySpace days, somehow I came across an episode of something that you did. To this day, I don't know what it is, and I'm about to ask you in a minute. But it was on, I believe it was on IFC, Independent Film Channel. And it was the episode of whatever it was where you went to the States and you tried to get the Klan to let you join as a Jew who's not very Jewy.
Yeah. So that was for a show on sort of religion or whatever. So I was looking into the Ku Klux Klan, and I saw how they used to not let Catholics in, but then they kind of adjusted their rules or whatever. So I went to the Ku Klux Klan, and like it was all organized beforehand. Like that I was going to come, but they didn't know I was Jewish or whatever. And so, yeah, we end up in one of their, I don't know what you call it, a compound, a hall or whatever, but, late at night, and it was in Orange County of all places. So it was the Orange County Klan.
Orange County, California, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we went in there, and there's like, 5 guys in militia, camouflage, and they've got all the flags, swastika flags and all the other ones. And yeah, I sit opposite him, and it's just going along well, just like an interview, the history of the Klan, blah, 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 blah. And then like me, I act faux naive, and I say something along the lines of, I was wondering if like someone like me could join the Klan because I'm Jewish, but I hardly do anything Jewish anymore. And then,
actually what you said was, and because I will never forget this, you said, because I don't do anything very Jewy.
Okay. So, and he's like a bit taken aback. He's going, no, you can't do that. And I'm arguing my case. I'm going, I haven't done anything really Jewish since my bar mitzvah. Like I drive on the Sabbath. I mix milk and eat meat. I eat pork or whatever. I'm arguing with this Klan guy that saying I'm so, not Jewish, that I should be able to join the Klan.
You should have said, well, it's not like you guys are Nazis, right?
And then I said to him, I said, my one of my arguments was, I said, I'm whiter than Hitler because I have blonde hair and blue eyes. He had brown hair and brown eyes. If I went to school to Hitler, I'd be the one beating him up for being a wog. And the Klan guy was not happy with that.
No. But
so that was fun.
I loved at the end, you ultimately got him to say you couldn't join, but if you had a kid with somebody who wasn't Jewish, then that kid could join.
Yes. Yeah. So, I got there a compromise. So that was good.
Yeah. Because that's what we all need is a compromise with the Klan, I guess. So, how did you go from and what was it? Was it The Amazing Race or the World Race or World?
It was called Race Around the World. That was the documentary show. Yeah.
So, how did you transition from Race Around the World to getting your own show?
Just because of that, like I went into development with the ABC here in Australia, and I did a pilot, and that didn't get aired, and that was like quite controversial, my pilot. And this was in a time where you could still hide things. So I got into trouble with the dude who's at that point in time was like the most powerful current affairs host in Australia. So, and their current affairs show was like famous for like door stopping people, and just stopping at their shops and say, oh, you've ripped off people with this washing machine, or accusing people of being on the dole, being slack and not looking for work. Like they're always like picking on, the unemployed and everything like that. So I kind of turned up, I found out his address, and I kind of turned up to his house and door knocked and acted as a sort of like a faux naive reporter, where I was asking him why it's 11 a.m. in the morning and he's still at home. Why isn't he at work? And just doing all that kind of stuff. And it got out of hand, and he grabbed me by the collar, and anyway, then the ABC refused to air it. And this was back in a time when, like, they could do that and sort of know that it would never get out, because how would it get out? And anyway, it did end up getting out anyway. But so it was like dubbed on VHS tapes. It was like the same year that like Pamela Anderson and her sex tape, you know, got dubbed from VHS to VHS and passed around the world. So yeah, my tape was like that.
Okay, there was a lot of that back then. There was you. There was the fart tape, if I could speak English. There was that. There was, well, and you know what? This was back when Howard Stern was like in his heyday, and I was always surprised that did you ever do Stern?
No.
I was always surprised that you didn't, because I was a huge Stern fan back in the day. And yes, I know Stern can be cringy, especially for people on this network. I don't care. I like him. He's funny. He makes me laugh. Cancel me.
It's just Gen X humor. Like, yeah, I get it.
It is Gen X humor. Yeah. And we were not politically correct in our humor.
Right.
Those of us who started doing stand-up. And that's the other thing I wanted to ask you too, that we've never talked about, John. Did you ever do like straight on stand-up comedy?
No.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that is because you're listed on like your Wikipedia as comedian, radio personality, documentarian, author, and satirist. And I was like, cool. Okay, I see all of those things. And I went for a deep dive looking for your stand-up because I'd never seen it and couldn't find it. So I'm like, okay, am I just stupid, or is there none?
No, not a comedian. Oh, I didn't do stand-up comedy.
Okay.
I guess the other thing explaining it to the non-Gen Xers is back then, the media was far more regulated and on all levels. So, for instance, you wouldn't have TV shows with bad lighting. You know, like Cops was the first show where suddenly there's cameras and they're shaky and they're at night, and it like that just was not an acceptable thing. That's how, like, what's the word I'm looking for? How professional things like television was back then. So when these sort of prankster show or this prankster aesthetic came in, even on that level, it seemed wild and exciting that there's this thing where suddenly everything can be a bit more rough around the edges. And yeah, like in that documentary show I was telling you about, we were like holding up our cameras like that with the flip screen, and it was like the first generation of flip screen. And so we're like talking video, even that like looked bizarre to a TV audience. Like, what is this? Like, it's just, what is this? And all this was also before reality TV. Like, reality TV really normalized this whole thing of it's like something's real, but it's not real, and it's sort of a bit set up, but it's not, and the camera can swoop here and there, and so that was sort of like another exciting thing, I think, to an audience about this Gen X, whatever you want to call it.
How much do you know about like your contemporaries?
I don't know who, like who.
Like, so when I was looking up your stuff, the closest analog that I had to you, in your specific style, was like the Yes Men. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of them.
Yeah,
the Yes Men,
they're
the ones that did the fake New York Times newspaper. That was basically like had a bunch of fake headlines on there, like ending the Patriot Act and a bunch of other stuff. It was obviously very politically driven, and it was almost like satirical, except that it's unbeknownst to the people involved, right? So they'd come up with like ludicrous premises that, for example, of someone giving up when they die or whatever, their body, they'll use their decomposed bodies to create energy for like wax as like a candle. And then like you'll have like execs, like oil execs and stuff like that, who would watch this type of stuff and go, oh yeah, that's an amazing idea, seriously, and they'd be extremely serious about it and stuff.
So it sounds like the Yes Men, and I think of you, John, in the same way. You guys were Borat before Borat.
Yeah, when I came back from Race Around the World, people were telling me to watch. They go, "Oh, you got to watch this film Roger and Me," and that was by Michael Moore. That was his first film. So he was around the same time, but I wasn't aware of him. And yeah, like Ali G hadn't happened yet, really. There was a guy in Britain called Chris Morris, who everyone was telling me to watch when I came back, and he did a fake current affairs show where, yeah, basically how you a bit yes man-y or whatever, but quite bitter and twisted in a way also. So yeah, there was something that just sort of was popping up around that time of the late 90s where there was obviously like something floating through the air, this community mental space where suddenly all sort of versions of me and me being versions of other people were sort of like popping up all over the world, even though we didn't actually know of each other. So, and I don't know why.
That's
Was
weird.
it just like that 90s like neoliberal heaven, right? Where the Soviet Union has dissolved and suddenly like we're gonna satirize our way to a better society.
It was a good time then, back in the day, though. It really was. I mean, we were all kind of carefree and didn't know any better. And when I found you, John, I mean, I loved the fact that you were so ballsy. I loved you. Like the second thing I saw, so the first thing I saw was the Klan thing. The second thing I saw was when you went door to door to preach atheism in Utah to Mormons.
Yeah. Yeah, that was just me sort of, flipping the script, I guess. Yeah, like not going door knocking in my white shirt and tie with my fellow atheist, and we're trying to spread the word about atheism to these to Mormons.
Yes, which they weren't taking very kindly to at all. Which that's that. And then the other.
I learned to like the Mormon. Learned to like them all, or I didn't never not like them or whatever. But one thing I found interesting door knocking was so many of them had nothing to hide. So you'd go to a front door and there'd be like a glass plate next to the front door where you could just like look through the entire house, and the dude would be just sitting in his chair on the other side, far at the back of the house reading the paper or whatever. And I was like, I'd never do that in my house. I've got too much to hide. I couldn't just like sit there and sort of leave myself that anyone could walk by and see me, because then they'd see my evilness. So the Mormons were kind of cool.
That's cool. And you know what? I saw the other one that I saw that I really liked, but it didn't really end, was you taking the peyote.
Oh yeah, that was just me immersing. Like, I did a show called John Safran versus God, where I was trying out other religions to see if I was following the right one, and I did to the Church of Peyote. And I drank it too slowly. I was following what they were saying or whatever. I went to the desert in Arizona on a spirit walk, and I was left alone in the desert. Like, I wasn't even allowed to take my crew with me. I had to set up the camera myself, and so I was a bit bitter and twisted about that, because I hate having to deal with the technical side of things. And so I kept on drinking this peyote, and I know I'm filming a story, so I'm like, oh, I need to get high, like, because that's the story. How do I have a story if I don't get high? And I was getting so agitated because I kept on drinking this peyote and not getting high. And then that became the story. That there's so many of my things are cut in such different ways to how I imagine. I always write them in a way where I guess I'm like, oh yeah, then I go here, and then I say this, and the other person's on the back foot, and haha, and I win, like Michael Moore or Sacha Baron Cohen does. But then I film them, and I always like fumble. I always like look nervous, and it doesn't happen, and then they have to be cut around that, which is kind of fun, I reckon. But yeah, so in the case of the peyote, there's me getting increasingly bitter and twisted, like sincerely bitter and twisted, because I'm in the middle of the desert and I can't get high, and the whole story is about me getting high on peyote. That became the story. And then, thank goodness, finally, I vomited. I never got high, but I managed to vomit. So I was very grateful for that. So thank you, Peyote God, for making me vomit. For
anyone who goes to find that episode, just so you know, trigger warning, he does throw up on camera a lot.
Yeah.
And it's really gross. So just be forewarned. And then the cringiest one, and I'm sorry that I call it cringy, John. I really am. You know I love you. But you going to your exes because, well, I'll let you explain why you did this.
Okay, so this is
when you went to your ex's mothers to see who would you best be with later by making out with their moms.
Yeah. So the problem with that, I don't know the problem. Some people like it or whatever, but most of my shows are a bit more, I don't know, documentary focused, but there's like a sting in the tail, it's a bit twisted or whatever, and there's a little of hijinks. Then at the time, I did this show called Race Relations, and at the point, the whole pranking thing had become quite popular, like through things like Borat, and in Australia we had a comedy team called The Chaser, but basically the world had shifted since I started, and I just kind of felt I just can't go out and do these things like me speaking as an artist, just go out and do the things like I have been doing. It's like the world shifted. So I had this general idea in my mind that I'd do a prank show where in every prank I end up humiliated, like just set it up in a way that's going to be the joke. Like that's how I'm going to be different to The Chaser or Borat or whatever, or Michael Moore, is I go out and do these things where I'm always just, like everyone's squirming in their seat and I'm always the fool. But then so I'm not sure how much that read in the final show though. Like I think everyone was like, "Oh, John, you look humiliated and ridiculous." But yeah, I don't know overall whether that was like a good strategy. So
it was definitely cringy.
Yeah.
It was definitely cringy. I can't even imagine either of my sons doing that with their girlfriends' moms. I mean, Grab.
The other problem with that.
I want to ask this. Grab, can you see you before or after? Okay, you've been married before. Before you married this current wife, to determine if she was right for you, you go to her mom and make out with her to see if you'll be happy in the future with her. I think we just broke Grab.
Yeah, Grab.
No.
Okay, Grab. It's just.
I guess that's dependent, right? I mean, every guy you're gonna ask that question to, it might be a different answer. If he got like a free pass out of it, right? But I mean, me personally,
John asked permission of all the women, and they were all right there.
Oh
no, I can't. I can't do that. I can't do that. There's no way. There's no way. Not in a group situation. That's like unbearable. I couldn't do it.
You mean you could make out with your mother-in-law with your wife sitting right there?
I'd fold so hard. I
don't know what I was thinking. I don't know
how you pulled that off with a straight face. I really don't know how you did it.
I don't know.
I don't either. I can't do it. I would just start laughing like mad.
Oh, that wasn't the. I don't know.
Was he successful? Was he successful at all?
That show, I don't know, because they're on like the version of the BBC or whatever. So like heaps of people watch.
Oh no, Grab that episode is on YouTube. Tony and I just watched it.
Oh, okay.
So it's on YouTube. Yeah, you can see it right now, and it's still as cringy as it was the first time I saw it.
I reckon the thing I really regret about that series was I tried to put a storyline in it that was a bit artificial. When I say artificial, is like when I did my other stuff, it's just like, I'm going to take peyote and that's going to be fun, or I'm going to do this and talk to this guy and do a prank or whatever, right? Whilst for some reason I'd read these stupid how to write a screenplay books, and they were always like, oh, you got to do a story arc and the character has to grow. So I'm the character, so I have to somehow grow or whatever. And so there was these sort of like artificial connection points between all of the skits that no one watching it is buying it. Like no one watching it is like, oh, John did this to try to get some greater learning or whatever, or now John's learnt and John inside has grown a bit as a person. Like no one's buying it, and yet that's what I was sort of selling in that show. And so that's the reason why I think that series. I reckon that series could have been better if I just stripped that away. Like for instance, I went to the Philippines in that series, and because they have an Easter festival where people go along and they get crucified, like they get a nail put onto their palms or whatever. And so I took part in that ritual. And so I should have just done it. I should have just been like, okay, I'm doing this or whatever. Except there was like this artificial storyline where it's like, oh, I'm trying to get rid of the Jew in me and I'm trying to think of ways to get rid of it. And so now I'm going to try this thing. And it just like doesn't ring true on all levels. And so, yeah, I really regret. I got crucified wrong, basically. But you only get one chance to do it. Like no one's going to be like, hey, John's getting crucified again. Let's see how. It doesn't happen. So I ruined my crucifixion.
That's wild.
That's the weirdest sentence I think I've ever heard. I ruined my crucifixion. That's.
I mean, the other thing where like life has just moved on, like the media landscape is everyone's got a camera in their pocket now, a video camera, and
everybody's podcasting.
And things like, for instance, being overseas used to be like, you know, like me just standing there in the Middle East or something would just be, what? This is a bit interesting. But like now, just everyone's got a camera in their pocket. I like sometimes I've walked past a TV and there's some journalist who's embedded themselves with like the Kurdish rebels, and there's like fire back and forth, skirmish, and they're like ducking there with their soldiers or whatever. And it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, but what else have you got for me? Like we've just been, we're so used to and so desensitized to the cameras being able to get everywhere. And but back then that we had that at our advantage where like it just seemed really like interesting that suddenly there were like, how did John sneak the cameras into here or there or whatever? And so, yeah, it was a good time to be a prankster.
So go ahead. I'm sorry, Gav.
Oh, I was going to say, how do you think political satire, how do you think that has had its effects on society? Do you think it played out the way you thought it would? Or maybe you had something different in mind from like the pranks that you have done to stuff like Jon Stewart to the internet era? Like, where do you think, like, do you think it landed the way you thought it was going to land?
I think like Jon Stewart changed everything, but maybe not in the way that you're thinking or whatever, or you're asking the question, where he was very like put his heart on his sleeve and made everything quite literal about what the point was, and everything was watertight in how he presented something, like a beginning, middle, and a very clear political point. But he was like super talented. He was like the Beatles of doing that. But because he was so successful at that spawned an industry of people like talking to camera and giving this rhetoric, and that sort of seems to have taken over things, where before Jon Stewart there would have been more of an onus on, hang on, does this actually have a joke to it? And it probably would be erring to the other side of things, where it'd be like, oh, we don't want to look like we're too preachy. So if we want to get our point across, we've got to get it across without being so literal and so in how we're doing it. So he definitely changed the landscape for that. Like probably a good example of something that was really satirical, but not in a literal way, but it was taken by that at the time, was the first Borat movie, where that happened when George Bush was in power and the Iraq war was on, and everyone was getting really horrified by that and everything. And so somehow in this way that's the total opposite of Jon Stewart being very literal about things. This fake Kazakhstani guy going into the heartland of America and revealing that Americans didn't really know much about anything beyond their borders, and they just accept everything Sacha Baron Cohen presented as a Kazakhstan, even though it was like ridiculous. Like he was speaking in Hebrew and Polish and just making stuff up and sort of like all pulling things together based on vague stereotypes about foreigners and sort of like showing up America in that way. That when that was like released in the cinemas, it was like taken that way as a bit of a poking a finger in the eye of America in the context of Bush and Americans having such cultural power. And also back then, it was the evangelical Christians, not the woke millennials, who held cultural power. They were the ones who could sort of, get LGBTI T-shirts cancelled from Walmart or whatever, like in a way that I reckon millennials would just not understand it. It was like, and so Borat was also seen a bit in that context. Like, so when he's sort of like making a bit of fun about, like he goes into a church here or he's making fun of an American in that context, it was sort of like, the satire was sort of like in a non-literal way was sort of poking a bit of fun at America that way. If that doesn't answer your question or answers it, I don't know.
That's okay. It's Into the Abyss. It doesn't matter. Which I didn't explain to you. So I know it's morning. Actually, what time is it in Australia?
Oh, it's just a quarter to midday here.
Okay.
So it's 11:45.
Okay, so it's 8:45 here p.m. So basically, Into the Abyss is, after all, the week's horror, this is where we come to just kind of chill, decompress. We talk a little bit about politics sometimes, but we get our drink on, we get our smoke on, we get our vape on. It's not that serious here at all. So, if it screws up, it screws up. If we screw up, we don't care. It's, we've had an episode where I was so high I could barely talk. So don't worry about anything. So was the change in landscaping in like television why you started doing your radio show with Father Bob and started writing books, or was there?
Everything's just a bit more fluid than that. It's like people want you, and that's where there's a job, so you do that. The main reason I started writing books, though, was for one of my TV shows, I was in Mississippi and we were doing a little bit of a prank on a white supremacist, and it was totally random that it happened to be this guy. Like, my producers just would have emailed a range of white supremacists, and he happened to be the one who got back to us and agreed to it or whatever. So the whole idea, we went there and, we wanted to get a DNA sample from him, so to get tested to see whether he had any, non-white DNA in him or whatever. And it's a long story. And he ended up threatening to sue the TV network and everything like that. And so we could never air it or whatever. And anyway, so that was that. And so I'd spent a couple of days with him, maybe 2 days, 2.5 at the most. And then I just went off to Chicago or something to do something else. I didn't really think about it that hard. And then I think it was 11 months later, I'm on the internet reading the news, and that guy who I'd hung out with, the white supremacist, had been murdered. And the story was that a young black dude, because he was about 65 or something, and this young black dude who was in his early 20s says that the white supremacist had made sexual advances on him and he had to defend himself. So he ended up murdering the white supremacist, or killing the white supremacist at least.
And so that's your book, Murder in Mississippi, correct?
Yeah. So I was like, what? And I was really confused. And like, to get a TV show up, it always takes like a year and a half or something to get the funding or whatever. That's if everyone's on your side and wants to do it, let alone if they don't want to do it, then it takes longer. And so the court case was just starting, and I'd started reading totally coincidentally before that. I'd started reading true crime books, and I was like, "Oh, this is an interesting medium." And I was thinking, this was before I found out about the murder, because I was thinking, "Oh, maybe I could do something like this," because in lots of these true crime books, it's about an outsider hears about a crime, and then they go into this city that they've never been in before, and they start telling the story of that city, and they're the outsider, and there's fish out of water and cultural clash or whatever. I'm going, oh, that's a bit like what I do with my docos, except there's no murders in my docos. And then, yeah, it was like weird. This murder landed on my lap, and the court case was starting, and it was just, well, I'm either going to go over and do it myself or not do it. Like, the court case isn't going to wait a year and a half for me to get my funding up. So I just went there and ended up writing a true crime book, and that's how I sort of got involved in books. And I really like book writing because it's a bit more like slow, like slow cooking or something. Where when I do my docos, like I'm in and out of a city in like 2 days, and you have to get everything. And whilst a book, there's more time to ruminate over things.
Yeah, I was going to say, I find writing a lot more cathartic than performing live, because for me, it's easier for me to think things through in writing as opposed to just like, I'm not good. I was never good with hecklers. I can be quick on my feet, but I get thrown. So I don't know if that's kind of like how you felt about books, where it's just when it's you and your computer and you can just kind of relax and get your thoughts out completely.
Yeah, for sure.
I think for me, my creative writing process, I don't know, because I think the only way to get really better at writing is by reading a lot. And I don't read too much anymore. Like I'm mostly an audiobook person now. And for me, I much prefer if I can talk it out. I'd much prefer to talk it out versus like writing it out or writing it on a paper. But I also come from like a very weird background because like most of my writing when I was in school was like creative writing, right? Like we'd write stories and whatnot. And I remember really enjoying that stuff to then being like a critic and like a journalist of sorts. So I would like review things, I would get interviews and stuff like that. So I recall like the whole like, okay, spend 2 days like watching something or playing something or whatever, finish halfway through the third day, begin the writing process, record on the fourth, edit on the fifth, publish. Like that was like my 5-day routine. And after that, because writing got so cyclical for me, it like boxed me in. And so I much enjoy like coming up with things on the spot and like just saying it versus like writing it out and stuff.
I can see that. I mean, everybody's creative process is different. So, I mean, what works for some people doesn't work for others. Just like, and was it a podcast or was it just a radio show with Father Bob?
Oh, yeah, that was like a weekly radio show on the ABC's Youth Network, which was weird, seeing he was a senior citizen priest.
I was going to say he was like 8 million years old.
Yeah. Well, when they asked me to be on it, they said, "Oh, I thought it was just funny to get a co-host because it was the Triple J, the Youth Network or whatever," and I thought it was kind of funny to get an old Catholic priest as my co-host. But he's sort of one in a million. There's no second version of him. Like even if I was to do a show and it was like, I'll get Father Bob and let's get the wacky Hindu, like it just won't be the same. Like there's something really
Special
archetypal
about Bob?
Yeah, archetypal about Bob. Like he's kind of cranky, but that's a surface level thing, and like he's warm underneath. And so it's like the perfect back and forth of like me annoying him and him getting annoyed, but you secretly know we're not angry at each other or whatever. So yeah, it works perfectly.
And is that still available to hear?
Oh, I think
know it
it's
used to be.
Yeah, I think it's places on the I think maybe like unofficially or
Okay,
whatever.
if
Like
you
I
want
did
to
that,
find it, you're going to have to hunt. I don't know what to tell you.
I did that for roughly 10 years with Father Bob, and then yeah, it was just time to move on or whatever. I might do something again with him. I'm always catching up with him or whatever, and like the book I'm writing about at the moment about the cigarette industry, somehow worked out a way to get him in on it, and so yeah, I still see him all the time.
So this book is on the tobacco industry and tobacco vaping, or vaping in general.
Yeah, it's about the cigarette industry and the vaping industry, and so one of the things that it sort of revolves around, or one of the big themes, is how cigarettes are so out of the zeitgeist at the moment, compared with, just say, climate change or Black Lives Matter or something like that. Mm-hmm. But cigarettes still continue to kill.
They're killing me.
8 million people a year. It's like the world's biggest public health crisis. It actually does intersect with all these things like class and race and everything, but it's just so out of the zeitgeist. Like, no one cares about it. And one particular cigarette company is trying to move on to the next era, like coming up with a new product that they're trying to sell. And in theory, this should be, wow, one of the most interesting things happening at the moment. Like, a cigarette company might be dying, the cigarette industry might be dying out because people are like moving off cigarettes, and the cigarette companies have worked out a way to keep it going, but it's just like no one cares. And so a lot of the book kind of revolves around that, about what is it about this that it's so out of the zeitgeist and no one cares. And
well, I think because smoking is so like not a thing anymore. I mean, think about when you and I were younger, people smoked on the news. People smoked on talk shows, not just podcasts, but like Dick Cavett, all the guests on Johnny Carson would be smoking. So now everything is so anti-cigarette. I mean, I'm one of the last of a dying breed, no pun intended, but millennials aren't big smokers, and Gen Zs are even less than that. So
I will say that, coming from someone who was working a minimum wage job like a couple of years ago, and being around a bunch of millennials and Zoomers, the Juul pod with the vaping, when that was really in vogue before the Trump ban, it was bad. It was really bad. Like, I remember like when 16-year-olds were getting like those the heavy duty like vape pens, and they would just like get somebody. It was like alcohol. Remember how like you would get like your friend who's like 21 to go inside and get alcohol for you, and or like get a pack of cigs? It was like that, but with Juul pods. And like the amount of tobacco that you're intaking from the Juul pods on the vaping, it's so much. It's so much in comparison to an actual cigarette.
Okay, I worked for Vape Magazine for a while, and as a smoker and a cigarette smoker, and I've been smoking since I was 8, with 2-year breaks with both kids, and I'm 53. I tried to do the whole, a lot of people quit cigarettes and, use vaping to do that. And my boss was trying to get me to do that. I couldn't take it. It was too harsh. So I think, but that's such a generational thing, because I now know some Gen Xers that vape tobacco, but all the Gen Xers that I know that vape tobacco did it to try to quit smoking cigarettes. Where all the millennials that I know that vape, and all the Gen Zers that I know that vape, and most of that is through my kids, that was just like their thing. Vaping was the new tobacco.
Well, I think what changed the game on the vaping side of things is after like vaping got really in vogue and like the jewel pods started getting banned and stuff was also around the time of when the marijuana carts, the weed carts started really going into circulation and stuff. And so now you have this complete black market in the United States of like weed carts and stuff that are getting circulated, right? Some of it's authentic, some of it isn't. And it varies on price, but the thing is like for the price of the jewel pods, you can also get the equivalent price of like the weed cart. So it's just like now, like, and then of course you have the millennials who are also telling you, yeah, weed's way better than tobacco. Stop doing tobacco. So you have more people like more. I think there's more people now who are becoming more aware of that fact, and the fact that even like the sucky weed carts or whatever that are out there, that type of stuff is still like to them is still better than like getting jewel pods and vaping tobacco. So for like a similar price or cheaper in some instances. So it's just like, why not just do that instead? Like that's like the real like big change in this generation.
Well, and I also think too, it has a lot to do with the fact that so many states are now either totally legal or medically legal. So I think that, did you find that, John, that has a big impact on the whole vaping, like people starting with tobacco but moving towards cannabis, or have you gotten there yet? Or
it's a really big mess in Australia because it's in some ways illegal to vape, but in other ways legal. Like you're not allowed to at the moment you're not allowed to sell nicotine vapes in Australia, but you're allowed to sell the vaping devices. You're allowed to sell the juice without nicotine, and then it's also legal not for companies but for individuals to order in a small quantity of nicotine juice from another country. So it's all like this great big mess in Australia at the moment. But
what's the weed situation as far as I don't even know about legalization.
I think it's generally not legal, and there's a bit of things going through about medicinal marijuana, but it's not like from what I gather,
Australia
it's
has
not
like a
LA.
legalized weed now party, right?
Yeah.
I know that. I remember that. I remember that from the elections. I think it was like or the early 2010s, whatever election was around there. I remember the legalized weed now party being a thing on the internet. As like some like joke of like, haha, Australian politics, haha. Yes. Our two-party system superior. It brought us Barack Obama.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, Lord, don't even start. Crab, stop it. Stop that right now.
From what I understand, there's a lot of drug taking in Australia, even amongst like in a more mainstreamy way. But it's not really discussed. It's really, things are weird in Australia. Maybe it's the same in America, but where things aren't quite discussed, so you never quite know like how to ground things when you're talking about them. I'd be confused about if I told people, just say, I don't do drugs or whatever, but I've occasionally done them. And I'm really confused if just say after I took some drugs, if I went and told a group of average Australians I'd done that, like, would they think that's bad? Or would they think like, oh, well, who cares? Like everyone does. Like, I don't have my bearings on that because things are sort of like not discussed like that. Everyone like does things on the shadow, on the sly, and when it comes to drugs or whatever. So I have no idea whether if someone said, "Hey, I take cocaine every third weekend," or I have no idea whether that's like an outrage to the average Australian, or whether it's like, oh, everyone can do what they want to get, like, because nothing's really discussed here except for alcohol, because we've got a big alcohol drinking culture here, and that's out in the open, and that's discussed, I guess. But for lots of things just aren't really discussed.
Well, I think America used to be like that. It used to be very much the same. But now, like I said, so many states are either fully legal or they're medicinally legal, and so many more are getting ready to become medicinally legal. Like I think Cuomo just said that he was going to make pot legal in New York because they need the revenue after COVID. And it just makes sense. I mean, I don't know how much the state of Florida, where I live, has made, but I know the dispensary that I was working at recently, we had 39 stores and we're considered an essential business. So in the heart of COVID, we were the only we were the only dispensary that was still letting people come physically into our shops. And during the heart of COVID, we were 20, 30, 40 people deep every day. And 39 stores like that. And I think the cheapest thing that we sold was $20. But like, I just bought from a different dispensary, I just bought 30, 50 milligram tabs, and it was $100. That ain't cheap.
Yeah.
And I had to take 2.
Right. Yeah.
Just to go to sleep every night. So, I mean, that's not cheap.
That whole, like, I know that the culture has shifted when like the white Southerners or like the white Midwesterners that come visit the tourist area that I work at, when they're like going to the hotel that I work at and like are like, oh, we're gonna go smoke this outside, want to join? Because they want to like have some camaraderie with me. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. When I know those crowds of people are like getting more and more open about like weed usage and stuff like that, that's how you know the culture's like completely changed.
Oh yeah,
because I'm just seeing that more often. Like people will just hit me up like, hey, do you know any connects around here for weed and stuff? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, but when you're here in Florida and you've got 70-year-olds who are carpooling to the dispensary because they're out, you know, it's become so much more mainstream, which I think is a good thing personally. Grab you. I don't know if you and I have talked about it, but I have talked about it on the show. I was a heavy duty weed smoker, but young, like grade school young, because of babysitters. I quit when I was 13 and didn't start again until I was 50, or 2 weeks before I turned 50. So it's changed so much from what it used to be in the States. And hell, Colorado's talking about legalizing magic mushrooms. So I think that's progress, personally. John?
Yes?
What was I going to ask you? I just lost my mind. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, with what you guys were talking about then, is in America you have these reference points to then consider other things as they intersect with them. And two of your big reference points are your kind of puritanical Christian roots in America. And the other one is your libertarian, you know, political roots that's really well established and written down in America. Whilst in Australia, we don't quite have those. So like trying to discuss anything, it's like, it's very confusing. Like it's like, for instance, just say with marijuana, like in America, you can be like, well, what will Christians think about this? And what will libertarians think about this? Well, in Australia, like, of course we've got Christians and libertarians and everything, but we don't have that sort of this really well-established roots going back hundreds of years where our country was based on this and that or whatever. So it's utterly, it gets really confusing trying to figure out when something happens about, well, what do Australians think? Or what's the Australian take on this? Because like, well, I don't know, I guess the only, I mean, you could go the Aboriginal take and you could go the multicultural take, I guess, or something. But Australia's not quite like America in that way, especially with like Christianity. Like Christianity just doesn't have this cultural dominance in Australia where they I mean, they've got power in many ways, in different ways, but yeah, it's just a bit different. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
No, that's super interesting, especially because you also have the difference in your native peoples or the Aboriginal people and Americas with Native Americans. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've kind of got a bit of the same history going between.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. I from what I've picked up from Aboriginal people, yeah, a parallel, a connection would be more with, say, Native Americans rather than Black Americans, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Like because it's a lot of their, and of course I'm just totally overgeneralizing and kind of.
That's okay.
But like it's things about land, for instance, like Aboriginal people, their desires and their wants are much more kind of connected to that, like rather than perhaps things like skin color or whatever, like they're, so it's just that sort of history. But yeah, like Aboriginal Australians have been, we're definitely not as advanced as America is when it comes to discussing these issues when it comes to Aboriginal Australians, because and it's just kind of weird. Like I once went with this friend who was this Aboriginal dude who was filming a doco, and he was going around trying to tell the history of all these weird place names like Murder Valley and got shot through the head, mountain or whatever. And there's all this stuff where like Aboriginal people have been killed and then a place name's named after it, but it's sort of like invisible, and yeah, it's not discussed at all. Oh, sorry, it's kind of really under discussed, and then.
But you guys still, it's there because if it wasn't, I wouldn't know about it because I'm here, I'm not there. Yes. And I know about it from TV shows from Australia.
Oh, yeah. I mean, none of these things are like it's 100% one way or the other. So obviously, in some ways, yeah, there is a layer where it is discussed, especially at the moment. There's like relatively mainstream organisations like questioning Australia Day because it's founded on a day that some Aboriginal people find offensive, or and so there used to be, like on the radio station, they used to have their hottest 100 big hits of the year. They'd have it on Australia Day, and they felt cultural pressure to kind of change it in I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and to not have that on Australia Day because it's too disrespectful to Aboriginal people. But well, yeah, but the whole thing with Aboriginal things, it's not. There's like lots of poverty, and we're really hidden from it in Australia, or it's easy to be hidden from it.
It's the same with the Native Americans here on the reservation, so that's not much different. And okay, you're gonna laugh at me, or maybe you won't. But how I really, okay, I'm such a dork. How I really learned about Aboriginal peoples of Australia, and then I looked on my own, but was from Cleverman.
Oh yeah, I mean I haven't seen that show, but they'd be happy for that, I reckon.
I love that show, and I don't know why it doesn't have another season.
I don't know. I can find out about that for you if you want. I can get back to you.
I love that show. I'm sorry, but it's a very Halloween-y themed kind of show because it's very mystic, and it talks about a lot about the history of abolition of the Aboriginal people, but in a very sci-fi kind of way.
Yeah.
So that's why I like it.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's really. There's only 1 or 2 seasons. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2, and it just ends in the middle of shit, which really pissed me off. But I thought it was a really good show, personally. But that's just me. But you know what? We did it. We've passed the hour.
Oh, cool.
Yes, we did.
Oh, excellent.
We have passed the hour. I thank you so much for all this. I'm not going to try to even do a podcast or a post show today because I'm still dealing with technical issues with my computer. So okay. I just want to say, John, thank you so much for coming.
No, thank you.
Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
I don't know. You can I recently did a podcast about the occult that's up on Audible. So if you're into the occult, I've got all my audio books on occult on Audible, and I don't know, that kind of jazz.
And the books
Can I
that
use
you
a free
have,
credit to get it?
The what?
Can I
Do you
use
have
a credit on Audible to get it?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Okay,
for a
cool.
while the Audible occult podcast was actually free, but maybe that was just for Australians or whatever. And
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
okay, well,
yeah.
you know what? If you want to find out more about John, if you want to see more of John's videos, or if you want to read any of John's books, you can go to his
Oh yeah,
Facebook.
johnsafran.com. Yeah, just go. It's on my Facebook page or johnsafran.com, or yeah, I'm not hard to find.
Okay, because I'm looking at johnsafran.squarespace.com. I don't know what the hell
that's
that
right.
is.
Yeah.
There's that. He's got a lot of stuff on YouTube. He's got a Facebook page. You're also on Twitter, aren't you?
Yes, regrettably.
We all are. And Grab, what do you got to plug, honey?
As always, I do a Power Rangers focused podcast called Sentai Truther Club. We recently released an episode where we reviewed the entirety of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 3. We've got an episode coming up where we review the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie. And yeah, we're very excited to work on it every week, as I'm very excited to work with you on Into the Abyss every week.
Thank you. And don't forget, everybody, we're just podcasting from our homes, and we're trying to put something together, make some money a little bit. So if anybody can go to patreon.com, not safe, you can become a patron. I believe now it's at the $5 level. Is that right, Grav?
Yes.
The $5 level? Okay. You can do more than that if you want, but the $5 level is where we start. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. And don't forget, I also have a book. Grav, you've got to write a book, damn it. Everybody's got a book. I've got a book. Forgotten Tomorrow's Crazy Todays. It's available on Amazon in paperback and on Kindle. And I think everybody ready to get out of here for Halloween?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
You too. Bye.